A mall in Manila just sold out an event with 0 tickets, 0 price, and 0 seats being sold. And if that sentence confuses you, good. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why an entire nation just rearranged itself around one 21-year-old girl walking through a shopping center. Something is happening in the Philippines right now that goes far beyond sport. And I promise you, the deeper we go into this story, the more you'll realize this isn't really about tennis at all. Before I take you there, I need to ask you for something small but important. If stories about ordinary people becoming something a whole country rallies behind move you even a little, subscribe right now. Not as a favor to me, but because stories like this one, quiet, years in the making, suddenly exploding into something enormous, deserve to be told properly and followed all the way through. Every subscription tells me it's worth continuing to dig into moments like this one. So hit that button now, because what I'm about to walk you through next explains something that most people got completely wrong on the surface. Here's the headline everyone's repeating tonight. Eala's Manila fan meet sold out in minutes. Except, technically, that sentence isn't even true, and that's exactly where the story gets interesting. There are no tickets. Nothing is being sold. The event is completely free, hosted at a mall activity center in Makati City, organized by the telecom company that signed her as an ambassador years before anyone outside the tennis world knew her name. Registration opens in the afternoon. The program starts in the evening. And yet that viral sentence keeps spreading anyway, because everyone reading it instinctively understands what it actually means. It means a 21-year-old who was outside the top 100 in the world barely a year ago is about to walk into a shopping mall, and her entire country is going to organize itself around her arrival. To understand why this moment carries so much weight, we have to rewind just 6 days. Eala walked off Wimbledon's center court as the first Filipina in history to reach the round of 16 at a Grand Slam. She lost that match in 3 tough sets to an Italian opponent, winning the middle set, but unable to close it out. 2 days later, she was on a plane home, and when she landed, the arrivals hall didn't look like an airport anymore. It looked like a stadium, with the head of the Philippine Olympic Committee there in person to greet her. That was 3 days ago. Now it's the country's turn to show up for her, and this time, it's happening in a place with no VIP section, no press box, just a mall a few kilometers from where she grew up. But here's the real question simmering underneath all of this, and it's not the question you'd expect. It isn't whether Eala can compete with the best players in the world anymore, because she's already beaten 7 top 10 opponents, including the defending Wimbledon champion in straight sets on center court. That question is answered. The real question tennis insiders are quietly asking is whether one 21-year-old can carry the emotional weight of an entire nation's hope without it eventually breaking her. Because that weight is real, and it doesn't behave like ordinary pressure. Other athletes who've carried a nation on their shoulders have described it as something entirely different from normal competitive stress. Something heavier, something that doesn't ease up even after a win. And stay with me here, because this next part is where things get almost impossible to ignore. This didn't start with Wimbledon. If you rewind to the first half of the year, you'll find a pattern building month after month. Quietly at first, then impossible to miss. In January, she headlined the very first WTA tournament ever hosted on Philippine soil. In February and March, she reached the quarterfinals in Dubai, and every single one of her matches are sold out completely. Not as a figure of speech, the actual venue, completely full. A Grand Slam champion who shared that tournament with her admitted afterward that seeing a full stadium meant something. And she wasn't talking about her own crowd. She was talking about Eala's. Then came Indian Wells in March, where thousands of fans stayed out in the cold past midnight just to watch her play a second-round match, and where her practice sessions were drawing crowds comparable to some of the biggest names in the sport on courts just a few feet away. Now pause and really sit with this, because this is the part that changes everything. In January, her country hosted its very first professional tennis tournament ever. By July, one of its own reached the deepest stage of a Grand Slam in national history. That is not a normal timeline for any athlete in any sport. That is a country and a player accelerating together. And what's happening on Wednesday in that Makati Mall is simply the moment that acceleration becomes visible in person. A well-known Filipino sports journalist put it in words that explain everything happening right now better than any statistic could. He said the country has been hungry for its next great sporting icon since the days when life itself seemed to pause for a single fight, when every road went quiet because everyone was watching one person compete. That is exactly the frame for what's unfolding this week. This isn't the country discovering Eala for the first time. This is Eala discovering, in a shopping mall in her own hometown, what her country has already quietly decided she means to them. And it isn't just Filipino fans saying this. Some of the biggest names in tennis have started reacting publicly to what's happening around her. A former world number one called the crowds trailing her a good problem to have. A tournament executive admitted they genuinely benefit from and promote the wave of attention she brings wherever she plays. Even members of the sport's royalty, past champions, tennis legends, and public figures far outside the sport reacted when she beat the defending Wimbledon champion. That is the room a 21-year-old from Manila is now standing in, whether the tennis world has fully processed it yet or not. But here's where the tension really tightens, because Wednesday isn't really the finish line of this story. It's the beginning of the next one. Just 12 days after this mall appearance, she steps back onto a hard court in Washington for her return to competition, followed by tournament after tournament, leading straight into the U.S. Open at the end of August, the final Grand Slam of the year. Her prize money for the season is already well past the hundreds of thousands mark, and her ranking sits right at the edge of the world's top 30. But none of those numbers are really what Wednesday is about. Wednesday is about something you won't find on any official ranking page. It's about her country telling her, face to face, what she now represents, so that when she walks onto that court in Washington less than 2 weeks later, she isn't walking out there alone. She's walking out there carrying something that didn't exist for her a year ago. And here's the part one think is genuinely important to sit with before we close this out. She is not coming home undefeated. Her last match was a real loss, a hard 3-set battle where she won the middle set and couldn't quite close out the third. She hasn't spoken at length publicly about how that loss felt, and we're not going to invent words for her that she hasn't said herself. What we do know is that her flight home was booked before that match ever finished, because she was always coming home either way. She just didn't know yet whether she'd be arriving as a Grand Slam quarterfinalist or as something else entirely. She arrived as a latter, and her country showed up at the airport anyway, and will show up at that mall anyway, because it was never really about winning a title. It was about coming home. So here's where we land, right back at that strange, technically false headline. Nothing was sold, because there was nothing to sell, and yet everything was already gone, claimed, decided, before a single person walked through the door. 48 hours ago, the only question was whether Manila would show up. By Wednesday evening, that question will already be answered, and it was answered a long time before this week. Built quietly through sold-out stadiums and cold midnight crowds, and a scoreline against a defending champion that fans will know by heart before she ever reaches a microphone. And that's exactly why this story is far from over. In less than 2 weeks, she's back on a hard court fighting for ranking points that lead straight into U.S. Open, the last and biggest stage of her season. Will the pressure of an entire nation's hope lift her higher? Or will it be the heaviest weight she's ever had to carry at exactly the wrong moment? Nobody knows yet, and that uncertainty is exactly why you need to stay with the story as it unfolds. If this moved you even slightly, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and let's find out together what happens when Mal Makati becomes the starting point of the next chapter in Eala's story.